On our 25th anniversary, my husband texted me, "Money is tight. We will celebrate next year." 15 minutes later, I saw him with two women. Hi, welcome to Family Revenge. Here's a new story for you today.
My husband pushed me to the kitchen floor on a Saturday morning and told me I was too ugly to stand next to him. So I destroyed everything he thought he was going to get. The linoleum was cold against my palms. Yellow fluorescent light buzzed overhead, the same light that had watched me cook 10,000 meals in that kitchen. And now it watched me lie there with my cheek pressed against the floor, while Gordon Prescott, 53 years old, a night shift security guard who could not hold a flashlight without his hands shaking, stood over me in a uniform he had rented from a costume shop on Madison Street. His fist was still trembling from the push. He was not a violent man by habit. He was a weak man who had just discovered what weak men do when they feel cornered. "Look in the mirror," he said. "Are you going to humiliate me in front of my friends with that monstrous face?" He meant the reunion. His 35th class reunion 2 weeks away. The event he had been talking about since August as though it were his coronation. And I was the thing he needed to hide. I did not answer. I pressed my tongue against the inside of my lip where I had bitten down to keep from screaming, and I tasted blood, and I stayed on the floor. Not because I could not get up. Because I wanted to remember exactly how this felt. The front door opened behind him. Caleb Prescott walked in, 35, my stepson, a neighborhood security patrol officer whose badge had been purchased from a defunct academy in Indiana for $400. He looked at me on the floor the way you look at something stuck to your shoe. Then he pulled a wad of cash from his jacket and threw it at my feet. "Why can't Dad have an affair?" he said. "Look at you. You're a stain on my career. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. If your own son threw money at your feet and called you a stain, what would you have done? Would you have screamed? Would you have picked up those bills and thrown them back?" I did neither. I watched the money land on the linoleum next to my hand, and I counted the bills without touching them. $300. He made $19 an hour. That was almost 2 full days of work he had just thrown at his mother's face. Chloe came next. 28, a beauty salon receptionist who spent more on skincare than Rent Gordon's daughter from before me. She did not throw anything. She slid a manila envelope across the kitchen table without looking me in the eye and said the words she had clearly rehearsed in the car. "Mom just signed the papers and moved to subsidized housing so we can still be proud in front of our friends." Divorce papers, already drafted. I did not need to open the envelope to know I had seen the corner of a legal letterhead sticking out of Gordon's briefcase 3 weeks earlier. They had been planning this together. All three of them. Not one cruel person and two bystanders. A coordinated family decision to remove me like a stain from upholstery. The only person who had not spoken was standing in the hallway. Ivy Prescott, 22. My daughter, a fourth-year law student at Loyola, with my steady eyes and fingernails bitten down to nothing from 3 years of watching this family eat itself alive. She stepped into the kitchen and put herself between me and Gordon. "Don't touch her again." Gordon slapped Ivy across the face. The sound cracked off the kitchen walls like a gunshot. Ivy's head turned, but her feet did not move. A bruise was already forming on her cheek when she looked back at him. Gordon grabbed both of us by the arms and pushed us toward the door. He threw our coats into the hallway. He slammed the door. The deadbolt turned. We stood in the stairwell of our own apartment building, locked out, and Ivy held my arm and said nothing. She did not need to. We had rehearsed this part too, not the slap, but the leaving. We had known for months that it would end this way. But I need to go back. 2 days before that Saturday morning, something happened that changed everything I was willing to tolerate. Friday evening. Gordon came home early, grinning, wearing a uniform I had never seen, navy blue, gold buttons, a patch on the shoulder that read, "Regional Director of Security Operations." He stood in the living room and turned in a slow circle like a child showing off a Halloween costume. "They're making me head of security before the reunion," he said. "Your husband is finally somebody." A costume rental shop on Madison Street. That is where my husband's pride came from, a rack of polyester uniforms next to Halloween masks. I recognized the logo on the inside collar. I had cleaned that shop's floors for 3 months in 2019. I said nothing. That night, after Gordon left to meet whoever he was meeting, I moved the living room bookshelf to vacuum behind it. Wedged between the baseboard and the wall was a small handkerchief, cream silk hand-stitched edges, gold thread initials in the corner LM. I brought it to my nose. The perfume was the same scent I had been smelling on Gordon's shirts for 6 months. Sweet, heavy, expensive. The kind of perfume a woman leaves behind on purpose. She had been in my home. While I worked night shifts cleaning office buildings, this woman had been in my living room on my couch behind my bookshelf. The betrayal was not distant. It was intimate. It happened in the room where I watched television and folded laundry and fell asleep, waiting for a man who was already gone. I put the handkerchief in my pocket, not to confront him, not to cry over it. I put it there because it was evidence, and I had been collecting evidence for longer than anyone in that apartment understood. That was the night I decided I would not wait any longer. Ivy went on Thursday morning. I did not go with her. Some conversations belong to siblings, and this one belonged to the sister who chose the truth, and the brother who chose the lie. She walked into Caleb's neighborhood security office at 9:15 with a single enlarged photograph in a manila envelope and no intention of leaving until he looked at it. The office was small, a converted storefront on Archer Avenue with fluorescent lights, a metal desk and a vending machine in the corner that hummed louder than the radiator. Caleb was sitting behind the desk in his patrol uniform, the badge pinned to his chest. Ivy told me later that he looked up when she walked in, and his face did the thing it always does when he sees her, a quick tightening around the jaw, the way a dog's hackles rise when it senses something it cannot control. "What do you want?" he said. Ivy did not sit down. She opened the envelope, pulled out the enlarged photograph, and laid it flat on his desk beside his badge. The original. The uncropped version. The one the newspaper had cut at the waist before publishing. "Look at the hands," she said. Caleb looked down. The photograph showed a woman on her knees, collapsing arms wrapped around a 4-year-old boy. A silver bracelet on the left wrist, the chain-link bracelet I had worn every day until the fire melted the clasp. Beside the woman, a man stood upright, clean, one hand placed on the child's shoulder. Not holding him. Positioned. "It was Mom who carried you out of the fire," Ivy said. "Not Dad." Caleb stared at the photograph. 10 seconds. I know because Ivy counted. She told me afterward that she watched his eyes and they did not move, not to the bracelet, not to the hands, not to the collapsing body in the lower half of the frame. They stayed fixed on a point in the center of the image, the way someone stares at something they have already seen before. 10 seconds. That is how long my son looked at the proof that his mother saved his life before he chose his father's lie one more time. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. His voice was flat, not confused, not angry. Flat, the specific flatness of a man who has rehearsed a position so many times, it no longer requires emotion to deliver. Ivy picked up the photograph. She slid it back into the envelope. She slung her bag over her shoulder and stood at the door. "Okay," she said. "You don't know. The court will help you find out." She walked out. Caleb did not call after her. He did not stand up. He sat behind his desk with the fluorescent light buzzing above him and his badge sitting on the surface where the photograph had been, and he said nothing. Ivy called me from the car. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the engine running too fast. She was gripping the steering wheel the way she grips things when she is trying not to cry. "He knew?" she said. "Yes. He has always known." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The engine sound leveled out. "What do we do now?" "We wait," I said. "One more day." The next morning, Friday, the phone rang in the Pilsen apartment. Ivy answered. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my hands flat on the surface, feeling the cold laminate under my palms. November wind pressed against the window. Ivy listened for 2 minutes. She thanked the caller. She hung up. The city's security department, she said. Caleb Prescott has been formally suspended pending investigation of fraudulent credentials. The review period is 5 to 7 business days. 5 to 7 business days. I counted forward in my head. The reunion was in 12 days. The suspension review would land right before it or during it. The complaint I had filed 6 months ago, long before the kitchen floor, long before the divorce papers, long before any of this became visible, was arriving on schedule. I want you to understand what it means to file a complaint 6 months before you need the result. It means you are not angry. You are not impulsive. You are not reacting to being pushed to the floor or having money thrown at your face. You are someone who has already decided the ending and is just waiting for the world to catch up. Right on schedule, I said. Ivy looked at me from across the kitchen. She had stopped being surprised by the scope of what I had built. Now she was just trying to keep up with the timeline. What else is coming? She asked. I leaned against the counter and thought about the pieces on the board. Caleb's badge was sitting in an evidence drawer somewhere in a city office. Gordon's lawyer was searching for an account that did not exist. The recorded threat against Father Thornton was filed and time-stamped. The FBI had a file on the woman Gordon thought was his salvation. The uncropped photograph was in Ivy's car. And every one of these pieces was converging on a single point, the class reunion 12 days away. But there was one more piece. One I had not told Ivy about yet. Chloe, I said. Ivy's face changed. She booked a cosmetic procedure, I said. Facial resurfacing, $28,500. The surgery is scheduled for next week, and she paid for it with a credit card she opened in my name without my knowledge. The statements have been coming to the Bridgeport apartment for 3 months. Ivy set her phone down on the counter. You have not reported it. No. Why? I looked at the window. The November sky was gray and low, pressing down on the rooftops of Pilsen like a hand about to close. Because the perfect moment to report a credit card theft is not when the card is used. It is when the person who stole it is lying in a recovery bed with bandages on her face, believing she got away with it. That is when the lesson lands. Ivy stared at me for a long time. Then she nodded. 5 to 7 days. 12 until the reunion. And Chloe's surgery was in 6. EM2 letters in graphite pencil smaller than a thumbprint pressed into canvas I had thrown away 3 years ago. And beneath them, a date, October 2019. Ivy sent me a photograph from the Bridgeport apartment. The bottom right corner of the abstract painting that hung above Chloe's couch. The cityscape of the Chicago River at dusk, blue-gray, tones a single orange light reflected in the water. Chloe's pride. Her best find. The piece she showed every guest and posted on social media as proof of her refined eye. I painted it on a Tuesday night in October 2019 in the church basement after my first successful gilding repair under Father Thornton's supervision. I was so exhausted, I used a kitchen knife instead of a palette knife. The texture Chloe admired as raw artistic intention was actually fatigue. I threw it in a trash bin near the corner of Michigan and Erie because I thought it was not good enough. 2 years later, it ended up at a Pilsen Street fair. Chloe paid $800 for it and hung it on her wall. October 2019. The exact month Gordon told the family I had disappeared to avoid my debts. I was not hiding. I was in a church basement learning to restore antiques worth more than his entire pension. And the painting that proves it has been hanging in his daughter's living room for 3 years. Leave it on the wall, I told Ivy. The reunion will give that painting a new caption soon enough. Have you ever made something so carelessly that you forgot it existed, and then discovered someone else built their entire identity around it? That is what happened. Chloe's taste, her social media posts, her dinner party conversations about supporting independent artists, all of it was built around a half-finished practice piece by the woman she wanted to send to subsidized housing. I did not laugh. The irony was not funny. It was architectural. Every wall Chloe built against me had my fingerprints in the foundation. 2 days passed. Wednesday, Thursday. I did not leave the Pilsen apartment. I did not make phone calls. I did not review evidence or check timelines. Everything was in place. The only thing left was the waiting, and I had been training for that my entire life. Friday evening arrived like a verdict. I stood in front of the closet where 3 items had been sealed in garment bags since September. I unzipped the first one. A navy sheath dress purchased from a consignment shop in Wicker Park for $62. Simple. Straight cut. The kind of dress that does not announce itself but does not apologize either. I unzipped the second bag. A pair of low-heeled black shoes rolled twice polished until the leather shone. The third bag held something that was not purchased, my mother's freshwater pearl necklace kept in a safe deposit box since before the fire, the only piece of jewelry I owned that predated every loss. I laid them on the bed. The cedar smell from the garment bags filled the small apartment. These were not weapons. They were not armor. They were the clothes of a woman who had stopped hiding. I put on the dress. It fit the way 5 years of physical labor and deliberate restraint had shaped my body, straight-shouldered, unapologetic. I clasped the pearls around my neck. They were cool against my collarbone. I stepped into the shoes. Ivy was sitting on the couch watching me. She had been quiet all evening, not nervous quiet, but the quiet of someone witnessing something sacred. When I turned from the mirror, she stood up. "Mom," she said, "you look beautiful. I look like a woman who has nothing to prove and everything to reveal. I want you to understand something about revenge, the real kind, not the movie kind. Real revenge does not arrive in a sports car. It does not wear a red dress or carry a weapon. Real revenge arrives in a consignment shop dress and a dead woman's pearls, and it sits down quietly at the table where they expected an empty chair." Ivy placed the leather portfolio on the kitchen table. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, one for Gordon, one for Caleb, one for Chloe. Beside them, the certified valuation from Christie's, and a printed photograph of the painting on Chloe's wall zoomed in on the pencil mark in the corner. I did not open any of them. I had read every draft 12 times. "Are you scared?" Ivy asked. "No," I said. "I have been scared for 5 years. Tonight I am just ready." She nodded. She picked up her own bag, a second portfolio with legal documentation copies of everything organized, the way a fourth-year law student organizes evidence for a case she has been building since she was 16. I looked around the Pilsen apartment one last time. The place that had been my sanctuary for 3 years, the $1,100 a month secret no one in my family knew about. The bathroom where I had first removed the mask and seen my own healed face. The couch where Ivy had slept the night Gordon threw us out. The kitchen counter where I had read the detective's report in the dark. I picked up the leather case. I walked to the door. My heels clicked on the apartment floor, a sound I had not heard myself make in 5 years because invisible women wear soft shoes. I opened the door. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror, a woman in a navy dress carrying a leather case looking like she was going to a business meeting. And she was. For the first time in 5 years, I walked out without checking if anyone was watching. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not pull a scarf across my face. I did not lower my eyes. I said it aloud to the empty hallway the way a person says a prayer or a verdict. "I have waited 30 years for tomorrow." Then I corrected myself in the silence. Not 30 years. 5 years of planning, 25 years of surviving. And exactly 4 days of knowing that the painting above Chloe's couch was mine. I closed the door behind me and walked toward the stairs. On the day of his reunion, my husband threw my most beautiful dress onto the floor and sneered, "Are you really going to embarrass me in front of my friends with that monstrous face?" But he forgot one thing. Every scar on my body came from the day I ran into a burning house to save his son when he was just 4 years old. And now that same child humiliates me, calling me ugly, a monster. They think I'm broken. But they forgot I survived the fire. And this time I won't be the one who burns. One small thing before we start. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever stayed quiet about something for years, not because you were afraid, but because you were waiting for the right moment, yes or no? I read more of your comments than you realize. A few details in this story have been shaped for storytelling. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, the lesson is what matters. That handkerchief stayed in my pocket for 2 days. I carried it like a receipt for something I had already paid for and was about to collect. But before I tell you what happened next, I need to sit with you for a moment, because what I am about to show you changes everything you think you know about me. Before we go any further, if you are listening to this right now, tell me something. What are you doing while you hear this? Driving, lying in bed, sitting somewhere quiet. Whatever it is, I want you to stay with me, because this story is going to ask you some questions you might not want to answer. If you have ever been looked at and judged for something you cannot control, your face, your age, the job you work, then you already know part of what I am about to tell you. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you would have done on that kitchen floor. I want to hear it. A quick note. Some details in this story have been adapted for storytelling. Any resemblance to real names or places is purely coincidental, but the message I am sharing with you is something I believe every woman over 50 needs to hear. Stay with me. Now, Saturday night, hours after Gordon threw us out, Ivy and I took a bus to a studio apartment I had been renting in Pilsen for 3 years. Nobody in the family knew about it. Not Gordon, not Caleb, not Chloe. I paid in cash $1,100 a month, and the landlord never asked questions because I never gave him a reason to. The place smelled like bleach and old carpet, but it was mine, the only space in Chicago that belonged entirely to me. Ivy fell asleep on the couch within 20 minutes. She was exhausted. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to a purple crescent beneath her left eye. I covered her with a blanket, closed the bedroom door, and locked myself in the bathroom. Now I need you to forget everything you just saw in that kitchen. The woman on the floor. The money thrown at her feet. The daughter slapped for standing up. Forget all of it. Because the woman standing in this bathroom is not that woman. I stood in front of a cracked mirror under a single bare bulb. The faucet dripped. Somewhere outside, an L train rumbled past and shook the window in its frame. I reached behind my head and untied the cloth mask I had worn every day for 5 years. I unwound the scarf from my neck and jaw. I set them both on the edge of the porcelain sink, and I looked at my face. Smooth skin, no scars, no burns, nothing. The reflection staring back at me was a 50-year-old woman with clear skin, sharp eyes, and a jaw that had not carried a scar since the spring of 2019. 5 years ago, a reconstructive surgeon had removed every trace of the burns I had carried for 2 decades. The procedure took 11 months, 3 surgeries. Recovery in a clinic nobody in my family visited because nobody in my family asked. I put the mask back on the next morning after that final surgery. Not because I needed it, because they needed to believe I still did. Let me say that again so you understand exactly what I mean. My face healed 5 years ago. I chose to keep wearing the mask. I chose to let Gordon call me ugly. I chose to let Caleb throw money at a woman he believed was disfigured. I chose to let Chloe slide those divorce papers across the table to someone she thought had no options and no power. Have you ever let someone believe they were stronger than you, not because you were weak, but because their blindness was useful to you? That is what I did for 5 years. People do not guard against the invisible. A woman with a scarred face who cleans offices at night, nobody watches her. Nobody locks their filing cabinets when she empties their trash. Nobody changes the subject when she enters a room because they assume she cannot understand what they are discussing. Nobody suspects that she goes home, removes her mask, and sits down at a work table in a church basement to restore antiques worth more than their annual salaries. I ran cold water from the tap, drank it from a plastic cup, and looked at myself again. The taste of blood from where I had bitten my lip in the kitchen was gone. The salt had faded. What replaced it was something I had been carrying for longer than anyone knew, a feeling that is difficult to describe to someone who has never had to hide in plain sight for half a decade. It was not anger. Anger is loud and it burns out. This was quieter, colder. This was the feeling of a woman who had spent 5 years watching, memorizing, documenting, and building something so far beyond what Gordon thought he controlled that when the time came, he would not even understand how he lost. I touched my cheek in the mirror. Smooth, warm, mine. I pressed my fingertips against the skin where the worst scar had been along the jawline, and I felt nothing but the warmth of my own body. Then I looked at the door where my daughter was sleeping. Ivy was 22 years old and in her 4th year of law school. She did not choose that career by accident. I chose it for her 6 years ago. I sat her down when she was 16 and told her that one day I would need a lawyer I could trust more than anyone in the world, and I asked her if she was willing to become that person. She said yes, without hesitating. I smiled at my reflection, not a warm smile, a patient one. They thought they had won tonight. They did not know that I had been waiting for exactly this, and what I had built in the years since makes everything Gordon thinks he owns look like pocket change. What I built was not a backup plan. It was the only plan. And it started with a phone call. The phone rang at 12 minutes past midnight. Ivy was still asleep on the couch, the bruise on her cheek turning yellow at the edges. The screen lit up the dark apartment unknown number 312 area code. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. The voice was calm, unhurried, the kind of voice that belongs to a man who wears linen suits and drinks tea instead of coffee. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask how I was doing. I hear you are having some trouble, he said. Christie's is still waiting for the November shipment from EM Restoration. EM Restoration. 2 initials. My initials before I married Gordon and became a Prescott. A name that existed only on invoices, auction consignment forms, and wire transfer receipts sent to a church address in Bridgeport. A name my husband had never heard. A name my children did not know. A name that on paper belonged to nobody and in practice belonged entirely to me. The shipment will be on time, I said. Good. Victor Wainwright, by the way, in case you have forgotten my voice. 10 years of phone calls and I still have not seen your face. Victor Wainwright, 58 years old, Director of Decorative Arts at Christie's Chicago. He had been buying pieces from EM Restoration for a decade, restored clocks, salvaged oil paintings, refinished designer furniture without ever meeting me in person. I had never met this man face to face. Only phone calls, shipping labels, and envelopes of cash forwarded through the church. He knew more about my professional life than my own husband did, and that should tell you something about the kind of marriage I had. You will see it when I am ready, I told him. He laughed softly and hung up. Ivy was sitting up on the couch. The phone light had woken her. Mom, who was that? The buyer. She stared at me. I could see the questions forming the same questions you probably have right now, but I did not answer them with words. I told her to put on her shoes. We walked 6 blocks through October cold at 1 in the morning, past the taqueria on 18th Street that never closes, and the laundromat with the broken neon sign until we reached St. Brendan's Church on the corner of Loomis. The stone steps were slick with dew. I had a key to the side entrance. I had carried it for 20 years. The basement stairs were narrow, lit by a single overhead bulb that swung when you opened the door. The air changed the moment we descended. Linseed oil, wood polish, the faint chemical sharpness of solvent, and the warm smell of old lacquer. My daughter grabbed the cold metal railing and stopped on the 3rd step. She was looking at the room below. Shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling. On those shelves sat restored antique clocks, carriage clocks, mantel clocks, a grandfather clock ticking in the far corner with a pendulum. I had rebalanced myself. Oil paintings leaned against the east wall in padded frames, landscapes portraits, one abstract I had pulled from a dumpster behind a gallery on Michigan Avenue. 2 rows of furniture filled the center, a mahogany writing desk, a Louis XV side table, a set of Chippendale dining chairs with hand-carved cabriole legs I had spent 4 months refinishing. People throw things away when they decide something has no value left. Furniture art women over 50 with scars on their faces, and they never think to check whether the thing they discarded might be worth more than everything they kept. Ivy stepped off the stairs and walked to the mahogany desk. She ran her fingers along the surface, feeling the grain, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not surprise. It was recalibration. She was rebuilding her understanding of who I was, and every shelf in that room added another floor. "Mom," she said quietly, "how many years has this been?" 20 years. A door opened at the far end of the basement. Father Silas Thornton stepped through it, 70 years old, the parish priest at St. Brendan's, a man who moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had been keeping this secret for 2 decades. He wore black trousers and a gray cardigan. No collar tonight. He looked at Ivy, then at me. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. He had given me this basement when I was 30 years old and showed up at his door with a cracked porcelain vase I had found in a trash pile on State Street. I told him I thought I could fix it. He gave me a table, a lamp, and a key. I came back the next week with the vase restored and a second piece under my arm. Then a third. Then a fourth. 20 years of night shifts cleaning offices from 6 to midnight, then walking to this basement and working until 3 in the morning. Every piece salvaged from the magnificent Miles garbage, every piece restored with my hands, every piece sold through Christie's or private buyers under a name that did not exist in any public record connected to my marriage. I had swept their streets for 20 years, and in those 20 years I had taken back what they threw away and turned it into something more valuable than everything they thought they owned. Ivy stood in the middle of that basement, turning in a slow circle, and whispered the question I had been waiting for. "Does Dad know about any of this?" "No," I said. "And neither does his lawyer, because none of it is in my name." She looked at me, and for the first time my daughter did not see a victim. She saw the plan. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever hidden something so well that the person standing next to you every day for 20 years never once thought to look?" Father Thornton pulled open the filing cabinet in the corner of his office. The drawer was deep packed with manila folders arranged by year. He lifted the first one, 2004, and set it on the desk. Then 2005. Then 2006. 20 folders. 20 years of meticulous records showing every restored piece, every consignment receipt, every wire transfer from Christie's and private buyers, all registered under a single entity, the St. Brendan's Church Charity Fund. Ivy sat down at the desk and opened the first folder. I watched her eyes move across the pages the way they moved across case law, scanning for structure, for exposure, for cracks. She turned to the second folder, then the third. Her fingers traced columns of numbers on yellowed ledger pages, while the smell of old paper and candle wax settled around us. After 20 minutes, she closed the last folder and looked at me. "This is airtight," she said. "In any divorce proceeding, the court divides marital assets, property acquired during the marriage that is in either spouse's name. None of this is in your name. It is a charitable fund administered by the church. A judge cannot divide it. A lawyer cannot attach it. It does not exist as your property." "That is right. When did you start preparing for this?" "Since you were 10 years old." She stared at me. Father Thornton stood by the door with his arms folded, watching us the way a man watches a seed he planted 2 decades ago finally break the surface. "Your husband's lawyers have been looking for 6 months," he said quietly. "They have found nothing, because there is nothing to find under her name. I want every woman listening to this to hear what I am about to say. If you have assets, anything you built with your own hands, your own time, your own sweat, put them somewhere your name does not appear. Not because you are planning for divorce, because the law protects what it can find, and what it cannot find, it cannot touch. Ivy closed the filing cabinet drawer. The metal slid shut with a sound like a vault locking. She looked at me differently now, not the way a daughter looks at her mother, but the way a junior attorney looks at a senior partner who has been running the case from behind the scenes. "What else do I not know?" she asked. "A great deal," I said, "but not tonight." We locked the basement, said goodnight to Father Thornton, and walked back to the Pilsen apartment through streets that smelled like cold October rain. I did not tell Ivy the rest. Not yet. She was not ready for the part about the fire, or about the woman on Gordon's arm, or about the documents he was about to sign without reading. That part came 5 days later, Saturday night. The 35th class reunion at the Langham Hotel Gold Coast. Gordon had been talking about it for months, his coronation, his moment the night the world would see him as the man he believed he was. He wore the rented uniform, he polished the borrowed badge, and he walked into that hotel lobby with a woman on his arm. A costume rental uniform and a con artist on his arm that was the man who pushed me to the floor and called me ugly standing under crystal chandeliers in a 5-star hotel pretending to be somebody. The woman called herself Lydia Montgomery, of the Montgomery real estate family, she told anyone who would listen. She was 45, polished, confident, with a smile that cost nothing and promised everything. Her real name was Lydia Kowalski, born on the South Side, twice bankrupt, 3 prior victims in 3 different states. But Gordon did not know any of that. He saw what she wanted him to see, a beautiful woman who made him feel important standing next to him in a room full of people he wanted to impress. During the cocktail hour, Lydia handed Gordon 2 documents. She told him they were couple registration forms for the event standard paperwork sign here and here. Gordon pressed his pen down without reading a single line. He was too busy scanning the room to see who was watching him with his new woman. They were not registration forms. They were financial authorization documents. What he signed that night gave Lydia Kowalski legal access to accounts he did not yet know he would need. He came home after midnight. I was sitting in the dark by the window of the Pilsen apartment. He did not know I was there, of course, because he did not know the apartment existed. But I heard his car door slam 3 blocks away at the Bridgeport building. I imagined him walking up 3 flights of stairs with champagne still on his breath and a victorious smile on his face. The man who had thrown his wife to the floor 1 week ago was now the man with a beautiful woman, a reunion badge, and a uniform that fit. My phone lit up at 10 that evening. A 17-page report from a private detective I had hired 3 months earlier. I opened it in the dark. By the 3rd page I understood. Gordon had not found a better woman. He had not upgraded. He had not moved on to someone who deserved him more than I did. He had walked straight into a trap designed by someone far more dangerous than me. Lydia Kowalski was not a girlfriend. She was a professional. And the documents he had signed at that reunion were not the beginning of his new life. They were the beginning of the end of everything he had left. I closed the phone. I looked at the ceiling. And I smiled for the first time in days, not because I was happy, but because the game had just gotten bigger than even I had planned. The detective's report told me what I needed to know. Gordon's new woman was not new, and she was not his. But before I could use that, I needed to arm the people closest to me. My daughter sat across from me in a small cafe near Loyola University on Tuesday morning with a stack of legal documents and a red pen, and she asked me the one question I had been waiting 6 years to answer. "Mom, you knew this would happen someday, didn't you?" I set my coffee down. Morning light came through the window and caught the red ink on her papers. She was not asking out of surprise. She was asking because she already knew the answer and needed to hear me say it. "On your 16th birthday," I said, "I sat beside your bed after everyone else was asleep, and I told you everything. I told her about the fire. About the night 30 years ago, when a space heater Gordon had wired himself against code without inspection to save $40 on an electrician, caught the living room curtains, and took half my face before the fire department arrived. I told her how Gordon paid an investigator to write the cause as electrical short circuit. I told her about the assets I had been building in the church basement. And then I gave her a mission: study law. Not because she loved it, not because it was a calling, because I knew that one day I would need a lawyer who would not flinch, who would not be bought, and who would understand why I had done what I did. I needed someone whose loyalty was not professional but personal. I needed my daughter. She was 16 years old. She said yes without hesitating. 6 years of pre-law and law school at Loyola. 6 years of moot court constitutional procedure, property law and estate litigation. Every exam, every late night, every case study, all of it aimed at one outcome. The family needed a shield, and I had spent 6 years forging one. Would you have done it differently? Would you have let your daughter choose her own path? Or would you have done what I did and turned her into the weapon you knew you would need? I have asked myself that question 1,000 times. The answer is always the same. I gave her a choice. She chose to fight. Ivy put her hand on my wrist across the cafe table. Her fingers were stained with red ink. I am not angry, she said. I would have chosen law anyway. You just gave me a reason to be good at it. I looked at my daughter sitting opposite me, 22 sharp calm, with a stack of documents she had already annotated in 3 colors. This was not the child I needed to protect. This was the teammate I had trained. The next day, I visited someone I had not seen in 2 months. Some women collect recipes. Some collect grievances. I collected allies one at a time over 20 years, the way you build a wall brick by brick when you know a storm is coming. Maggie Holbrook was the first brick. Maggie Holbrook, 65, a retired city records clerk who lived on the 4th floor of the Bridgeport building, opened her door before I even knocked. She always did that. 30 years of living above me had given her an instinct for my footsteps on the stairs. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon, and old boxes stacked filing containers lined every wall, organized by year, because a woman who spent her career in city records does not stop filing when she retires. I was wondering when you would come, she said. She did not offer tea. She did not ask how I was. She walked to the hallway closet, knelt down, and pulled out a metal locker I had never seen before. Inside was a tin box rusted at the corners, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed with age. I have kept this since you first came to me, she said. 10 years. I knew you would need it eventually. I sat at Maggie's kitchen table and peeled the tape off the lid. The metallic scrape of the tin filled the small apartment. Inside were photocopied pages, a fire investigation report from 30 years ago. Maggie had pulled these copies from the city records archive before she retired, 1 page at a time over the course of a year, because removing an entire file would have triggered an audit. She did it in pieces. Patient. Invisible. Like me. I turned to the 3rd page. There it was. The investigator's name. The amount paid, $3,000 cash, noted in pencil in the margin by someone who either forgot to erase it or wanted it found. And at the bottom of the final page, Gordon's own handwriting. His signature beneath a statement that read, "Cause of fire, electrical short circuit. Faulty wiring. No party at fault. No party at fault." The man who wired a space heater with extension cords and left it running next to linen curtains while his wife slept on the couch signed a piece of paper that said nobody was responsible. And a city investigator took $3,000 to agree with him. I held the tin box in both hands. The metal was cold. The pages were rough, brittle at the edges, smelling of rust and old bureaucracy. My mouth went dry. Not from fear. From the weight of what I was holding, 30 years of silence compressed into a handful of photocopied pages that proved my husband had bought his way out of accountability for the fire that burned my face. The proof had been 4 floors above my head the entire time. Maggie had kept it in a closet between a box of Christmas ornaments and a bag of winter coats. She had waited 10 years for me to ask. I closed the lid. I looked at Maggie. "It is time to speak," I said. She nodded. She had been waiting to hear that too. I kept the tin box under my bed in the Pilsen apartment. Every night I felt its weight through the mattress, 30 years of proof waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived on a Thursday morning. The envelope came through the mail slot at 7:15, certified return receipt requested with a law firm's name embossed in the corner. Ivy picked it up off the floor before I could set down my coffee. She tore it open standing in the kitchen, pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, and started reading with her red pen already in her hand. I watched her eyes move down the first page, then the second. By the third page, her jaw tightened. "Divorce petition," she said, "filed by Gordon Prescott through Hargrove and Denton Family Law Division. He is requesting full dissolution of the marriage and complete division of all marital assets." She flipped to the next section. "They are demanding a comprehensive inventory of all assets held by you, bank accounts, real estate investments, business interests, personal property submitted within 14 days. 14 days. I picked up my coffee. It was already cold. 14 days is enough, I said. Ivy looked at me over the top of the papers. She understood. The petition was demanding an inventory of assets held in my name. There were no assets in my name. No bank accounts beyond a checking account with $1,100 for rent. No real estate. No investments. No business interests registered to me anywhere in Cook County or the state of Illinois. The church fund the restoration workshop 20 years of work, all of it existed under a name that was not mine and never had been. I want you to understand what it feels like to hold a legal document designed to strip you of everything and to know, sitting there with your coffee getting cold, that there is nothing for them to take. It is not victory. It is patience finally paying interest. Ivy circled 3 clauses in red and set the petition down on the kitchen table. "We respond on day 13, she said. "Not before. Let them think we are scrambling." My daughter was 22 years old, and she was already thinking like the lawyer I had raised her to be. The next morning, we took the L train to the West Loop. Garrett Farrell, 42, a former Chicago PD detective turned private investigator, worked out of a 7th-floor office on Randolph Street, where manila folders covered every horizontal surface, and traffic noise leaked through windows that had not been properly sealed since the building was renovated in 2011. He was the man I had hired 3 months earlier to investigate the woman on Gordon's arm. I had never met a detective who smiled less. That was why I trusted him. He did not offer us seats. He opened a file on his desk, thick-tabbed, held together with a binder clip, and began. "Montgomery is not her name," he said. "Her real name is Lydia Kowalski, born Southside 1979. First bankruptcy filed in 2015 in Ohio. Second in 2019 in Michigan. She owes $340,000 to people who do not send lawyers. $340,000 owed to the kind of creditors who collect in person, and my husband gave this woman his signature on a Saturday night because she smiled at him under a chandelier." Garrett turned a page. There were photographs, not mugshots, but surveillance photos. Lydia entering a bank in Columbus. Lydia at a restaurant in Grand Rapids with a gray-haired man who looked like he had just written her a check. Lydia outside a courthouse in Milwaukee. 3 prior victims, Garrett said. Same method each time. She targets men going through marital instability, separation affair, midlife crisis. She presents as wealthy. She builds trust over 4 to 6 months. Then she gets them to sign financial documents disguised as something routine. Ivy leaned forward. The papers he signed at the reunion. Financial authorization documents, Garrett confirmed. Not event registration. She now has legal access to any account he linked to that signature. I sat in the leather chair across from Garrett's desk and gripped the armrests. Not from fear. from the bitter iron-tasting irony of it. Gordon had pushed me to the kitchen floor because he thought I was holding him back from a better life. The better life was a twice-bankrupt con artist under active FBI investigation for federal financial fraud. Have you ever watched someone you once loved walk confidently into a fire they cannot see? That is what I was watching. And the strangest part was that I did not feel satisfaction. I felt tired. 20 years of building, planning, protecting, and in the end, Gordon was destroying himself faster than I ever could have. There is one more thing, Garrett said. He closed the file and looked at me with the flat expression of a man delivering facts, not opinions. The financial authorization he signed gives her access to his pension fund. What is left of it? How much is left? $12,000. He borrowed against the rest. $67,000 in pension debt accruing interest since March. I let that number sit in the room. My husband, the man who threw $300 at my feet like I was a parking meter, was $67,000 in debt on a pension he had already gutted. And he had just signed paperwork giving a federal fraud target access to the $12,000 that remained. Garrett closed the folder. Ivy stared at the desk. The traffic noise from Randolph Street filled the silence. I stood up, thanked Garrett, and walked to the door. Ivy followed. In the elevator, she looked at me and said nothing for 7 floors. When the doors opened onto the lobby, she finally spoke. "He is going to lose everything on his own, isn't he?" "Yes," I said. "But not before I show him exactly what he lost when he pushed me to that floor." Gordon was destroying himself. But before I could let that destruction run its course, I needed you to understand where all of this began. Not the kitchen floor, not the divorce papers. Earlier, 30 years earlier. I need to tell you about the fire now because if you do not understand what happened that night, nothing that comes next will make sense. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the first floor of a building on Halsted Street. Caleb was 4 years old. Gordon was 23. I was 20. It was February, and the heating bill was 2 months overdue because Gordon had spent the money on a used car he saw parked outside the neighbor's building. He wanted one just like it. So instead of paying the gas company, he wired a space heater to an extension cord and ran it through the living room to the kitchen where the outlet was the only one that still worked. I told him it was not safe. He told me to stop worrying. That night, I fell asleep on the couch with Caleb in his crib 6 feet away. The space heater was on. The extension cord ran under the living room curtains. At 2:14 in the morning, I know the exact time because the fire department logged it, the curtains caught. The cord melted into the carpet. The wall behind the couch was burning before I opened my eyes. I rolled off the couch and hit the floor. The heat was enormous. Not warmth, not discomfort, but a wall of pain that pressed against my skin like a hand trying to push me back down. The smoke was black and low. I could not see the ceiling. I could see the crib. Gordon came out of the bedroom. He looked at the flames, looked at me on the floor, and ran for the front door. He did not stop. He did not reach for his son. He knocked me sideways with his shoulder on his way past, and my palms hit the baseboard heater. The skin on both hands blistered on contact. I want you to picture this. A woman on the ground with her skin peeling off her hands, holding a 4-year-old boy against her chest, and the man who caused it all standing 10 feet away on the sidewalk waiting for a camera. I crawled to the crib. I pulled Caleb out with hands that were already raw and bleeding. I held him against my chest and walked through the doorway where the frame was burning on both sides. The left side of my face pressed against the wood. I felt the skin separate. I kept walking. Outside, the fire trucks were already arriving. Gordon was standing on the curb. When he saw me come out holding Caleb, he ran toward us, not to help me, not to check if I was alive, but to take the boy. He pulled Caleb from my arms. I collapsed on the grass. And when the news camera arrived 4 minutes later, Gordon was standing in the floodlight holding his son against his shoulder, eyes wet, looking like a father who had just saved his child's life. The smoke was still in my throat. The taste of ash and melting plastic sat on my tongue for 3 days. My hands were wrapped in gauze. My face was raw from the hairline to the jaw. And on the evening news, Gordon Prescott was the hero. The fire investigator came 2 days later. His name was in the file Maggie kept. So was the amount Gordon paid. The report said electrical short circuit. Faulty wiring. No party at fault. Gordon signed the statement himself. The investigator took the cash and filed the paperwork, and the truth was buried under a sentence that cost less than the car Gordon had wanted. I stayed silent. Not for Gordon. For Caleb. Because a 4-year-old boy deserves to believe his father is brave even when his father is a coward. I made that choice at 20 years old, and I carried it for 3 decades. That silence became the armor my children wore and the weapon they eventually used to cut me. Have you ever protected someone's reputation for so long that the lie became the only version of the truth anyone remembers, and then watched them use that lie to destroy you? Years passed. Caleb grew up hearing his father's version. By the time he was 8, he asked me once across the dinner table what I was doing when the fire started. I was at home watching the house, I said. He nodded. Not because he believed me, because he wanted to believe his father. There is a difference, and it took me 20 years to understand it. Caleb was not a foolish child. He was a perceptive one. He saw the scars on my hands every day. He saw the way I flinched near open flames. He saw Gordon leave the room whenever the fire was mentioned. And when he was old enough to read a newspaper archive, and I know he did, because Maggie told me he visited the library branch on Archer Avenue when he was 15, he chose not to ask again. He read whatever he read, closed the page, and went home to his father's house. He was not deceived. He was complicit. There is a difference between a son who does not know the truth and a son who knows it and decides every morning to look the other way because the lie is more convenient than the reckoning. The man who threw money at my feet on that kitchen floor was not acting out of ignorance. He was acting out of a choice he had been making since he was 15 years old, the choice to stand with his father because standing with me meant admitting what really happened that night. And admitting what happened meant admitting that the hero was a coward, the victim was the rescuer, and the scars on his mother's hands were the price of his comfort. My son knew. He had always known. And that was worse than the fire, because the fire was an accident. But Caleb's silence was a decision he made every morning when he woke up and chose his father's version over his mother's hands. Knowing the truth about Caleb did not make it easier. It made it sharper. But I did not have time to sit with that pain, because my daughter called me on a Saturday afternoon, and the first thing she said was not hello. Mom, do not come to the apartment. They are watching you. Ivy had gone back to the Bridgeport place to retrieve her old school records from the hall closet. She was alone. Gordon was at work, or wherever Gordon went when he said he was at work. The apartment was quiet, the air stale from weeks of closed windows and unwashed dishes. She found the records, packed them into a box, and was about to leave when she moved the bedside clock on my nightstand to check for a folder I used to keep underneath it. The clock shifted. Something behind the face caught the light. A small red LED no bigger than a grain of rice blinking once every 3 seconds. Ivy pried the backing off the clock with a butter knife from the kitchen. Inside, wedged between the battery compartment and the plastic casing, was a mini Wi-Fi camera. Lens pointed at the bed. Streaming live. She did not touch it. She photographed it from 3 angles, then used her phone to scan the local network. The camera's IP address was registered to a device named Chloe P-iPhone. There is a camera in your bedroom clock. Ivy said, her voice flat, and controlled the way it gets when she is furious but functioning. It is streaming live. The IP traces to Chloe's phone. I sat down on the edge of the couch in the Pilsen apartment and closed my eyes. My stepdaughter, the woman I had driven to school every morning for 6 years, whose hair I had braided for prom, whose first job application I had helped her write, had pointed a camera at my bed, on her father's orders. so he could watch me from across the city in my most private space. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Your own daughter, the one you bathed and fed and sang to sleep. She pointed a camera at your bed so her father could know when you were home, when you were alone, when you removed the mask you wore to protect yourself. Every night I had undressed in that room thinking I was alone. Every morning I had peeled off the scarf thinking no one could see someone had been watching. The violation was not physical, it was architectural. They had turned my bedroom into a surveillance room and my privacy into intelligence. Do not turn it off, I said. What? Leave it exactly where it is. Put the clock back. Make sure the angle is the same. Ivy was quiet for a long moment. Then she understood. That evening, I took the L train back to Bridgeport. I let myself into the apartment with the key I still carried. The place smelled like dust and Gordon's aftershave, the cheap one he bought in bulk from the drugstore on 35th Street. I walked to the bedroom. The clock sat on the nightstand, ticking softly, the red light invisible unless you knew to look for it. I knew exactly where the lens was pointed. I knew the angle. I knew the resolution. And I knew that whatever I did in front of that camera in the next 5 minutes would be transmitted directly to Chloe's phone and through her to Gordon and his lawyer. They built a trap to catch me. And I walked into it on purpose because the only thing more useful than avoiding a trap is letting your enemy believe it is working. I opened the bedroom cupboard, slowly making sure my body did not block the camera's view. I reached to the top shelf and took out a white envelope, empty one I had placed there that morning before Ivy's call. Before any of this, I had not planned for a camera, but I had planned for the possibility that someone was looking. When you have been invisible for 5 years, you develop an instinct for being watched. I sat on the edge of the bed, facing the clock, and uncapped a pen. I wrote a number on the front of the envelope in large, clear figures: $742,000. Then I placed the envelope back on the shelf, closed the cupboard, and stood up. I looked at the clock, not at the lens, but close enough, and left the room. The number did not exist. There was no account with that balance. No investment. No hidden fund totaling that amount. It was invented, a piece of bait written on a white envelope under dim bedroom light, with a pen I pressed firmly enough to make the digits unmistakable on camera. If that number appeared in any legal filing, any motion, any deposition, any mediation document from Gordon's lawyer, it would prove one thing: the information came from illegal surveillance of my private bedroom. And under Illinois law, evidence obtained through unauthorized recording is inadmissible, and grounds for sanctions, attorney discipline, and potential criminal charges against everyone involved in the chain. I walked out of the apartment into the October cold. The door handle was freezing under my fingers. The metallic taste of adrenaline sat on my tongue, not fear, but the sharp, clean taste of a move completed. I called Ivy from the sidewalk. The number on the envelope is $742,000, I said. It does not exist. If it shows up in any legal document, we will know exactly where it came from, and their entire case collapses. Ivy was quiet for a second. I could hear her breathing. "Mom," she said, "how long have you been thinking like this?" I looked up at the third-floor window. The bedroom light was off. The clock was still ticking behind the glass. "Longer than you know," I said. The trap was set. The camera was still rolling. And while I waited for the bait to surface in a legal filing, there were other threads to pull. Let me ask you something. If you discovered that the person who threw money at your face and called you a stain had been lying about who he was his entire career, would you feel vindicated? Or would you just feel tired? I felt both. Monday morning, Garrett's office. Ivy and I sat across from him while he laid a single sheet of paper on the desk, a printout of a website that no longer existed. The page showed a logo, an address in Lafayette, Indiana, and a price list. Professional Security Certification $400. Advanced Tactical Training Certificate $600. Background check waiver included. The academy closed in 2019, Garrett said. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. It was a certificate mill, No classroom, no training facility, no instructors. You paid online, they mailed you a certificate with a foil seal. Caleb purchased his in 2018. Ivy picked up the printout. The paper was thin and cheap between her fingers, the kind of paper that dissolves if you hold it too long, which is probably what the academy was counting on. So his entire career as a neighborhood patrol officer is based on a receipt from a website that does not exist anymore, Ivy said. $400 for a fake badge from Indiana. That is what my stepson's entire career was built on, a transaction from a defunct website, a foil seal on a piece of paper thinner than a grocery receipt. The man who called me a stain on his career did not have a career. He had a costume just like his father. Garrett pulled out a second document, a complaint form filed with the City of Chicago's Private Security Licensing Division. My name was not on it. It was filed anonymously through a public portal, but the details were specific. Caleb's certificate number, the Indiana Academy's dissolved business registration, the dates of employment that required valid credentials. This was filed 6 months ago, Garrett said. The division has been reviewing it. Processing takes 8 to 12 months, but once they verify the Academy's closure, his license will be revoked and he will be terminated. Ivy turned to me. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. 6 months ago, she said, before all of this happened, before the kitchen, before the papers. I did not act out of anger, I said. I acted out of preparation. The room was quiet except for the traffic noise leaking through Garrett's windows. Ivy stared at me the way she had been staring at me all week, as though she was meeting someone new every day who happened to live inside her mother's body. They thought they started the fight that Saturday morning. The truth is, I started it 6 months before any of them decided I was disposable. The next day, I went back to the Bridgeport apartment. Not for the camera that was still running, still streaming to Chloe's phone, still recording an empty bedroom. I went to retrieve winter clothes from the hall closet. I was walking down the corridor toward the closet when I heard Chloe's voice through her open bedroom door. She was on the phone, lying across her bed with a glossy art magazine open in front of her. The smell of her perfume drifted into the hallway, sweet, expensive, the kind she bought with money she did not have. I just ordered a vase from EM Restoration, she said into the phone. $800, but totally worth it. This artist is incredible. Have you seen the profile in Chicago Arts Quarterly Anonymous? But the work is stunning. I am going to put it on the shelf next to the painting. I stopped in the hallway. I put my hand flat against the wall to steady myself. Have you ever stood in a doorway listening to someone praise the very thing about you that they are trying to destroy, and realize that they do not even know it is you? The vase in that magazine was mine. I had pulled it from a trash pile at the corner of Michigan and Erie on a Wednesday night 3 years ago. The frame was cracked down the center. The glaze was chipped. I carried it home in a grocery bag, spent 2 nights in the church basement regluing the fracture lines, and sold it through a private buyer for $1,200. Somewhere along the resale chain, it ended up in a catalog. And now my stepdaughter, the woman who slid divorce papers across my kitchen table and told me to move to subsidized housing, was spending $800 to own a piece of work I had made with the same hands she found disgusting. I stood in that hallway and said nothing. Some ironies are too perfect to interrupt. Chloe kept talking. She held the magazine up to the light and pointed at something on the page I could not see from the corridor. I did not need to see it. I knew every piece in that profile because I had made every one of them. I took my winter coat from the closet and walked toward the front door. As I passed Chloe's room again, I glanced at the living room wall. The abstract painting she had bought 3 years ago, the cityscape of the Chicago River at dusk blue-gray, tones a single orange light in the water hung in its usual spot above the couch. She had paid $800 for that too. She called it her best find. I had not checked that painting closely. Not yet. But something about the brushwork, the rough textures she admired as raw artistic intention, looked familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I had a feeling about it. and my feelings had been right about everything so far. I closed the front door behind me and walked down 3 flights of stairs carrying nothing but a winter coat and a question I was not ready to answer yet. I did not check the painting that day. I was not ready for that answer yet. But I carried the question with me like a stone in my pocket as I sat down on a park bench near the Pilsen apartment the next morning to tell Ivy something she had been asking about all week. My daughter asked me how I met Maggie Holbrook, and I could see in her face that she was expecting a simple answer. She was not ready for the truth. "You think she was just the neighbor upstairs," I said. Ivy pulled her jacket tighter against the October wind. Her breath was visible in the cold air. Bare trees lined the path. The park smelled like fallen leaves and damp earth. "She was not," Ivy said. It was not a question. 10 years ago, I heard Father Thornton mention during a church dinner that a woman in our building worked as a city records clerk. I had been looking for someone with access to archived investigation files, specifically fire investigation files. I started visiting Maggie the following week. I brought cakes. I brought company. I listened to her stories about her late husband. I fixed the leaking faucet in her kitchen, and over the course of 2 years, I told her what happened the night of the fire. Ivy stared at me. She pulled the records herself. I continued. 1 page at a time over a year so no audit trail would appear. She put them in the tin box and kept it in her closet. And she waited. 10 years. "How long have you been doing this?" Ivy asked. "Building these connections?" "Since you were 6 years old." Some women plant gardens for beauty. I planted friendships for survival, and I watered them for a decade before I needed the harvest. Father Thornton was not an accident either. I chose St. Brendan's because it was small, because the priest was honest, and because a church charity fund is the safest legal structure. A woman with no power can build around assets she cannot afford to lose. Garrett was not an accident. Victor was not an accident. Every person in my network was placed there with intention over years, the way I restored antiques one careful piece at a time until the whole thing held. Ivy was quiet for a long time. She held the thermos of tea I had brought and did not drink from it. "Mom," she said finally, "you are the most dangerous person I have ever met." I took the thermos from her and drank. The tea was lukewarm and bitter. "I am not dangerous," I said. "I am patient. There is a difference." The next day, patience paid another dividend. Thursday afternoon. Gordon had been searching for my money for weeks, calling banks, pressuring Caleb to dig through public records, hiring his own lawyer to file asset discovery motions. Every search came up empty because there was nothing to find. But Gordon was not the kind of man who accepted nothing as an answer, so he went to the only place he had not looked. He walked into St. Brendan's Church at 3 in the afternoon. If a man walks into a church and threatens a 70-year-old priest because he cannot find his wife's money, I want you to ask yourself who is the real criminal in that story. Father Thornton was in the vestry when Gordon pushed through the side door. I was not there. I heard about it afterward from the recording. Gordon's voice echoed off the stone walls. He did not sit down. He did not lower his voice. He stood in the center of the vestry and pointed at the old priest the way a man points at someone he believes is beneath him. "I know she is hiding money through this church," Gordon said. "Tell me where it is, or I will report every dollar to the IRS, unusual financial activity. Tax fraud. I will make sure they audit every cent this parish has touched in the last 20 years. Father Thornton stood behind his desk. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Gordon the way a man who has heard 10,000 confessions looks at someone who has never made one. "I will give you 30 seconds to leave this building," he said. Gordon took a step forward. The priest did not move. 20 seconds, Father Thornton said. Gordon left. He slammed the vestry door hard enough to rattle the crucifix on the wall. His cologne lingered in the room after he was gone, the cheap drugstore brand hanging in the air like a stain. What Gordon did not know, what he could not have known, was that Father Thornton had pressed record on his phone the moment he heard the side door open. The phone was in his vestment pocket microphone facing outward. Every word Gordon said was captured in digital clarity. The threat, the demand, the accusation of fraud against a charitable institution, all of it. Father Thornton sent the recording to Ivy that evening. I sat in the Pilsen apartment and played it 3 times. The first time I listened to the words, the second time I listened to the fear underneath them. Gordon was desperate, grasping a man who could feel the ground shifting under him but could not see what was moving it. The third time I just listened to the silence after Father Thornton told him to leave. 20 seconds of a bully realizing he had walked into a room where his threats meant nothing. I forwarded the recording to Ivy with one message: add it to the file. Every piece was in place now. The camera trap with the planted number. The fire evidence in the tin box. The fraudulent credentials complaint working its way through the city licensing office. The recorded threat against a parish priest. The federal investigation file on the woman Gordon thought was his future. All of it assembled over months, over years, over decades, stacked and labeled and waiting. All that was left was the mediation hearing, and the number that did not exist. The mediation was scheduled for Monday. I spent the weekend not preparing. I had been preparing for 20 years. I spent it sitting by the window in the Pilsen apartment drinking tea watching November arrive. The mediator's office smelled like new carpet and old decisions. It was on the 14th floor of a building in the Loop District, beige walls, fluorescent lights, a conference table long enough to seat 8, but set for 4. Water in plastic cups at each place. A potted plant in the corner that had never seen sunlight. Gordon sat across from me. He wore a blazer I had never seen, new dark blue, too tight in the shoulders. His lawyer sat beside him, a man in his 50s with a leather briefcase and the practiced calm of someone who charged $300 an hour to say things other people wrote for him. The mediator, a woman with reading glasses on a chain, sat at the head of the table with a legal pad and a pen she clicked every 30 seconds. Ivy sat beside me. She had brought one legal pad blank and her red pen. Nothing else. No folders, no binders, no stack of evidence. She placed the pad on the table and folded her hands. She looked like a 4th-year law student. She was something else entirely. Gordon's lawyer opened his briefcase and removed a printed document, 3 pages stapled with highlighted sections. He slid it across the table to the mediator. Our preliminary findings indicate that the respondent holds undisclosed assets. He began. His voice was smooth rehearsed. Based on information obtained through our investigation, we estimate the total value of these assets at approximately $742,000. $742,000. The exact number I had written on a white envelope in a dim bedroom in full view of a spy camera hidden inside a bedside clock. I did not move. I did not blink. I held the plastic cup of water in my hands and felt the smooth surface of the table under my elbows. Ivy did not react either. She uncapped her red pen. "Sir Ivy," said her voice level, almost friendly, "where did that number come from? I want you to picture this. A man in a suit who charges $300 an hour sitting in a mediator's office in downtown Chicago, citing a number that came from a camera his client's daughter hid in a bedroom clock. And he cannot say where he got it." The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. The lawyer shifted in his chair. He looked at his papers. He looked at Gordon. Gordon looked at the table. "Our investigation team compiled this figure from multiple indicators," the lawyer said. "Which indicators?" Ivy asked. She had not written anything on her legal pad. She did not need to. "Can you cite a bank statement, a property deed, a tax filing, any documented source for that specific amount?" The lawyer's pen clicked under the table. The mediator looked at him over her reading glasses. "We are still compiling the supporting documentation," he said. "So you presented a number to this mediation without documentation," Ivy said. "Is that correct?" The mediator wrote something on her pad. The pen clicking stopped. Gordon's jaw tightened. His cologne drifted across the table, the same cheap brand filling the stale conference room air. I sat there with my hands in my lap and watched the trap close the way you watch a door swing shut on its own hinges. There was no drama, no shouting, no evidence slammed on the table. Just a 22-year-old law student asking a simple question that a $300 an hour lawyer could not answer without incriminating his own client. Have you ever watched someone destroy their own case with their own mouth and felt nothing, not joy, not anger, just the quiet satisfaction of a plan that worked exactly as you drew it? The mediator called a recess after 40 minutes. She noted for the record that the petitioner's counsel had presented an unsubstantiated asset figure and that no supporting documentation had been provided. She recommended both parties return with verified records within 10 business days. 10 business days. Gordon's lawyer would spend those 10 days searching for an account that contained $742,000. He would not find it because it did not exist. And when he failed to produce documentation, the mediator would note the discrepancy. And when Ivy filed a motion asking the court to investigate how Gordon's legal team obtained that specific figure, a number that existed nowhere except on an envelope visible only from a camera hidden in a bedroom clock, the entire chain would unravel. Illegal surveillance, evidence tampering, attorney misconduct, criminal liability for everyone who touched that footage. The mediation ended without resolution. But I did not need resolution. I needed confirmation. And I had it. Gordon's lawyer knew about the camera, which meant Gordon knew. Which meant every person in that family who had access to Chloe's phone, Gordon Caleb Chloe herself, was now implicated in unauthorized surveillance of a private bedroom. Ivy and I walked out of the building into the November wind. She did not smile. Neither did I. We stood on the sidewalk and she said one word. Perfect. I nodded. Behind us, through the glass lobby doors, I watched Gordon and his lawyer step into the elevator. Gordon's hands were in his pockets. His lawyer was speaking rapidly, gesturing with one hand. Gordon was not listening. He was staring straight ahead with an expression I had not seen on his face in 30 years. Fear. Not of me. He still did not understand enough to fear me. Fear of what he did not know, because the number was the smallest trap I had set, and he had no idea how many more were waiting. Neither did his lawyer, neither did Caleb, neither did Chloe. But they were all about to find out. The next traps did not require patience, they required timing. And the timing started on a Tuesday afternoon when Ivy walked into the Harold Washington Library. She called me from the archive floor, her voice tight with the controlled urgency I had learned to recognize over the past month. Mom, I found the newspaper. And they cropped the photo. The Harold Washington Library keeps microfiche records of every major Chicago newspaper going back to the 1940s. Ivy had been there since 10 in the morning, scrolling through reels from the year of the fire-feeding coins into a machine that hummed and clicked in a dim basement room that smelled like old paper and toner. She found it on reel 14, the front page of the neighborhood section. The headline read, "Father Rescues Son from Apartment Fire." Beneath it, the photograph I had seen 100 times, Gordon holding Caleb against his shoulder. The burning building behind them, smoke curling into the night sky. But the microfiche had the original, the full frame, the version the newspaper had cropped at the waist before publishing. Ivy enlarged it on the screen and photographed it from every angle. Then she called me. "The hands holding Caleb in the original," she said. "They are not Dad's. They are yours. Your bracelet is on the wrist, the silver chain with the clasp you always wore. The bottom half of the photo shows you on your knees, collapsing with your arms still around him. Dad is standing beside you with one hand on the child's shoulder. He is not holding him. He is posing. I want you to look at that photo with me." A woman's hands wrapped around a 4-year-old boy, a silver bracelet glinting through smoke and firelight, skin already blistering on the knuckles. And beside her, a man standing upright, clean, untouched, with his hand placed just so on the child's shoulder, perfectly angled for the newspaper photographer who arrived 4 minutes after the fire trucks. For 30 years, that photograph told one story. The uncropped version told another. A mother crawling through fire with her son against her chest, while her husband stood 10 feet away waiting for a camera. The newspaper cropped the woman out. They kept the man. Ivy's voice was steady on the phone, but I could hear her breathing fast, shallow, the way she breathes when she is furious and trying not to show it. "I have everything," she said. "Every angle. The bracelet is unmistakable." "Good," I said. "Keep it safe." I hung up and sat in the Pilsen apartment for a long time. The vindication I expected to feel did not arrive. What arrived instead was an old grief, the kind that does not cry or scream, but just sits in your chest like a stone that has been there so long you forgot it was not part of your body. The next day I went to Garrett's office. He had been pulling financial records for weeks, court filings, bank statements, pension fund activity, building the full picture of who Gordon Prescott actually was beneath the rented uniforms and the borrowed confidence. On Wednesday afternoon, he laid it all on his desk. $67,000 in gambling debt. That was the number. Not the pension borrowing alone that was part of it, but the full accounting. Casino markers from 3 different establishments going back to 1998. Credit lines opened and defaulted. Cash advances on credit cards that were already maxed. A pattern stretching over 26 years that had been invisible to me because Gordon controlled the household finances, and I never saw a bank statement that was not already altered. $67,000 in debt, and he pushed a woman who was cleaning offices to pay the bills he was gambling away. He called me ugly while he was drowning. Lydia targeted him specifically, Garrett said. He leaned forward in his chair. Her pattern is consistent. She finds men in financial distress who are emotionally vulnerable, separation affair, midlife transition. Desperate men do not read what they sign. I looked at the spreadsheet. Red numbers circled in pen. Dates going back a quarter century. The gambling started 4 years after the fire, the year Caleb turned 8, the year I started night shifts. The year Gordon realized that the woman he had married was going to spend the rest of her life with scars he had caused, and a silence he could exploit. "That does not change anything," I said. "He still pushed me down." Garrett nodded. He did not argue. He was not the kind of man who argued with facts. I sat in that 7th-floor office looking at the full landscape of Gordon's ruin, and I understood something I had not understood before. He did not hate me because of my face. He did not hate me because I was a sanitation worker or because I embarrassed him in front of his friends. He hated me because I was the mirror he could not stop looking into. Every time he saw my scars, he saw the fire. Every time he saw the fire, he saw himself running. Every time he saw himself running, he saw the truth he had paid to bury. I was not his shame. I was his evidence. And that is why he needed me gone. Not because I was ugly, because I was proof. I stood up and walked to the window. Traffic moved 14 floors below on the streets I had cleaned for 2 decades. The city looked small from up here. Gordon looked smaller. Tomorrow Ivy was going to take the uncropped photograph and put it on Caleb's desk. Not to punish him, not to scream or accuse. Just to lay it down in front of him and let the image do what 30 years of silence could not force him to look at the truth he had been choosing to ignore since he was 15 years old. And I already knew what his face would do. Because he was his father's son. And his father's sons do not apologize. They calculate. Chloe's surgery was scheduled for Wednesday. I had known about it for 3 months. I had the credit card statements. I had the clinic name. I had the amount. And I had waited. I am going to tell you what happened to my stepdaughter now, And I need you to stay with me because this is the part that people either understand completely or do not understand at all. Before I tell you what was waiting for Chloe in that recovery room, do you think what I did was justified or cruel? Drop your side in the comments and add one reason because I have asked myself that question every day since. Please note, the next part includes some recreated details to deepen the emotional impact. The message behind it is what I hope stays with you. If that crosses your comfort line, you are free to stop here. Chloe walked into the North Shore Cosmetic Surgery Clinic in Winnetka on Wednesday morning at 7:30. She had booked a full-face resurfacing procedure, laser treatment, chemical peel collagen restructuring. The kind of procedure beauty magazines call a transformation and insurance companies call elective. The cost was $28,500. She did not have $28,500. She had a credit card she had opened in my name 3 months ago, using a copy of my social security number she found in Gordon's filing cabinet. The statements had been going to the Bridgeport apartment, the apartment I no longer lived in, the apartment where a spy camera sat inside a bedside clock streaming footage to her phone. My stepdaughter, the woman who told me to sign divorce papers and move to subsidized housing, was paying for a new face with her mother's stolen identity. The woman whose face she called monstrous was funding the face she wanted instead. I want you to sit with that irony for a moment because I have been sitting with it for 3 months. I filed the credit card fraud report at 9:15 on Wednesday morning, 45 minutes after Chloe entered the operating room. The timing was not an accident. I needed the surgery to be completed. I needed the charges to be fully processed. I needed the clinic's records to show a finished procedure paid in full with a fraudulently obtained card. And I needed Chloe to wake up from anesthesia believing she had gotten away with it. Is it cruel to let someone finish becoming the thing they wanted most before showing them the price? Or is it simply allowing them to live with the full weight of their own choices? I have thought about that question more than any other in this story, and I still do not have a clean answer. What I have is this: she stole from me. She stole my identity. She used my name to buy a face because she was ashamed of the one she had, and she did it while telling me that my face was the problem in the family. The surgery took 4 hours. Chloe was moved to a private recovery room at 1 in the afternoon. Her face was entirely wrapped in white bandages forehead to chin, leaving only her eyes and mouth partially exposed. She was sedated, comfortable, lying on white sheets in a sterile room that smelled like antiseptic and surgical adhesive. The heart monitor beeped in steady rhythm. Ivy arrived at 2:15. She was not alone. 2 uniformed police officers followed her through the clinic corridor. The head nurse tried to stop them at the recovery wing entrance. Ivy showed her the fraud report and the officer's authorization. They were let through. Ivy told me what happened next. She stood in the doorway of Chloe's recovery room and watched the officers enter. One stood by the window. The other approached the bed. Chloe's eyes opened. She was still groggy from anesthesia. She looked at the officer, then at Ivy, then back at the officer. Her mouth moved behind the bandages. The officer read her rights. Chloe tried to sit up. The nurse told her not to move the bandages needed to set for another 6 hours. The officer placed silver handcuffs on her wrists over the hospital blanket. The click echoed in the small room. The heart monitor sped up. Chloe tried to speak. Most of what she said was muffled by gauze and swelling, but one word came through clearly. Ivy heard it. The officers heard it. The nurse heard it. Mom. Not Gordon. Not Caleb. Not her lawyer. Mom. The woman she wanted to send to subsidized housing. The woman whose credit card paid for the face now hidden under surgical wrapping. The woman whose name was on the fraud report that put handcuffs on her wrists. Mom. My stepdaughter has a new face. A face that cost $28,500 of my stolen money. A face that is wrapped in bandages and will not be shown at any dinner party, any reunion, any social event for a very long time. Because when you are charged with identity theft and credit card fraud, the court does not care how beautiful you look underneath the gauze. Ivy sent me one photograph from the recovery room. I did not ask for it. She sent it anyway. White bandages, white sheets, silver handcuffs. My stepdaughter's hands, the same hands I held when she was learning to walk, when she was 8 years old, and I braided her hair for the first time resting on the hospital blanket with metal around her wrists. I looked at the photo for a long time, then I closed it and put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the taste of something bitter and permanent, the taste of a decision that cannot be undone and should not have been necessary. Then I picked up the phone and called Victor Wainwright. 10 years of phone calls and envelopes. 10 years of anonymity. It was time to meet the man who knew exactly what I was worth. Victor answered on the first ring. He said one sentence, "Monday morning, Christie's, I will be waiting." I had spoken to this man on the phone for 10 years and never once seen his face. When I walked into Christie's Chicago at the Merchandise Mart on Monday morning through the polished lobby with its white walls and carefully lit art displays, he stood up from behind a mahogany desk like he had been waiting for me his whole career. He was exactly what his voice had always suggested. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a linen jacket in November, because he was the kind of man who dressed for the work, not the weather. His office smelled like polished wood and gallery air. There was an espresso waiting for me on the desk. Small cup, no sugar, set on a saucer he had probably chosen himself. "So," he said, "EM Restoration has a face." "She always had a face," I said. "She just chose not to show it." He smiled. Then he opened a leather folder on his desk and turned it toward me. "I have known who you were for 10 years, he said. "I never said anything because you chose to be invisible, and I respected that. But I want you to know every piece you sent me I handled personally. No intermediaries, no junior staff, because the work deserved that." He turned to the second page of the folder. A printed document with the Christie's letterhead and a number at the bottom in bold black type. The official valuation of the full EM restoration collection held under the St. Brendan's Church Charity Fund is $8.7 million. He read that number the way a man reads a weather forecast. Calm, factual, as if the number was simply the logical result of 20 years of work, and he had always known it would arrive here. $8.7 million, built from broken clocks and cracked vases and discarded furniture that people threw into trash cans on the Magnificent Mile, while I swept the sidewalk next to them. Built in a church basement under a bare light bulb with linseed oil on my hands and exhaustion in my shoulders. Built one piece at a time, one night at a time, while my husband gambled his pension away and my children told me I was worthless. I picked up the espresso. It was the first expensive coffee I had ever accepted from someone who knew what I was worth. It tasted different from every cup I had drunk before, not better, just honest. "I would like to offer something," Victor said. "If there is a public moment where you choose to reveal your identity, any event, any venue, I will appear as a witness. Christie's will stand behind the valuation." I thanked him. I took the folder. I walked out of Christie's into the November wind carrying a document that proved I was worth more than every person who had ever called me ugly, worthless, or disposable. And I did not feel rich. I felt ready. That afternoon, I went to Garrett's office one last time. He had been digging through Gordon's phone records for weeks. Call logs, text, metadata, location data, subpoenaed through the divorce proceedings. Most of it was routine. But on Monday afternoon, Garrett found something that was not. 3 years ago, Garrett said. He slid a printed phone record across his desk. A timestamp was highlighted in yellow. October 2021. Gordon's phone pinged the cell tower closest to St. Brendan's Church at 11:47 p.m. The same night you made a call to Victor about a shipment valued at $180,000. I looked at the highlighted line. "He followed you," Garrett said. "Or he was already nearby. Either way, he was within earshot of your phone call. He heard you say the words 180,000. He did not understand the full picture. He did not know about Christie's or the church fund or the collection. But he heard enough. He pushed me to the floor and called me ugly. But now I want you to ask yourself, was it really about my face? Or was it about the money he thought he could take if he got rid of me fast enough? That is why the divorce accelerated. Garrett continued. He hired Hargrove and Denton 6 months later. He started the asset search. He planted the camera through Chloe. He threatened the priest. All of it traces back to that one phone call he overheard 3 years ago. I sat in the leather chair and let the full picture settle. Gordon did not push me to the kitchen floor because my face disgusted him. He did not throw me out because he wanted Lydia. He did it because he believed I was hiding money, and he wanted to seize it before I could protect it. The cruelty was not emotional. It was financial. Every insult, every shove, every demand to sign papers was a calculated move to pressure a woman he thought was sitting on a fortune she could not defend. But the fortune was never mine. It belonged to a church charity fund registered under Father Thornton's name. Gordon had been calculating against an empty safe for 3 years. Every dollar he spent on lawyers, every camera he planted, every threat he made, all of it aimed at wealth that existed in a structure he could never touch. He knew. He calculated. He hired lawyers, planted cameras, threatened a priest, and pushed his wife to the floor. All to seize assets that were never in her name to begin with. And now every thread was pulling toward one night. The FBI had confirmed the arrest window. Victor had agreed to appear. The doctor had cleared my face. 5 days until the 35th class reunion. 5 days until I walked into that room and showed them all who I actually was. 5 days. Every thread I had woven over 20 years was pulling toward one night. And on Monday afternoon, the last thread locked into place. Garrett put the phone face down on his desk and said 3 words that changed the timeline of everything. They are ready. The FBI. The federal investigation into Lydia Kowalski, the woman Gordon believed was his salvation, had reached its operational phase. Garrett had been in contact with the case agent for weeks, feeding information from our side, confirming dates and aliases. Now, the confirmation was final. They expect to move within 5 to 7 days, Garrett said. Any public location where she appears using a registered name, they need a verifiable identity match real name against a guest list or registration. Ivy was sitting beside me. I watched her eyes change as the timing clicked. The class reunion, she said. It is a public event. There is a guest registry. She will be listed under her fake name, but the FBI will have her real one. They can match her at the door. Garrett nodded. I looked at both of them. The office was quiet except for the traffic noise that never stopped leaking through those 7th-floor windows. So everything converges on one night, I said. 5 days. I want you to sit with that number. Because in 5 days, every lie Gordon told, every badge Caleb bought, every dollar Chloe stole, and every name Lydia faked was going to land on the same floor at the same time. One night. One room. One woman walking in without a mask. Garrett confirmed that Victor had agreed to attend as a witness and would bring the certified valuation documents. The evidence envelopes were prepared, one for Gordon, one for Caleb, one for Chloe. Each contained a summary of what we had on them. Not threats, not accusations, just facts printed on paper sealed in white envelopes with their names on the front. I thanked Garrett and left his office for what I knew would be the last time before the reunion. Ivy walked with me to the elevator. Neither of us spoke until we reached the street. There is one more thing I need to do before Saturday, I said. The next morning, I took a taxi to a private clinic on the north side. I had been there 4 times in the past 5 years, always alone, always wearing the mask, always entering through the back entrance. Dr. Renee Gallagher, 55. The reconstructive surgeon who had removed my burn scars 5 years ago in a series of 3 procedures. No one in my family knew about opened the examination room door with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew the results. Last check, she said. She guided me to the examination chair under a bright overhead light. She put on latex gloves and traced her fingers along my jawline, my left cheek, the area around my temple where the worst scarring had been. Her touch was clinical, but careful, the hands of a woman who had spent 3 decades rebuilding faces and understood that skin is not just tissue, but identity. The skin is fully healed, she said. She stepped back and pulled off the gloves. There are no visible scars. Faint silver traces along the jaw in direct light, but nothing a casual observer would notice. She looked at me. Are you sure you want to do this? I have waited 5 years. She nodded. She did not try to talk me out of it. She did not ask why. She had known why since the first consultation, a woman sitting in her office wearing a mask. She did not need explaining that the scars were gone, but the disguise was not. I will be there that night, she said, as your doctor and as your witness. I thanked her. She left the room. And then I was alone. I stood up from the examination chair and walked to the mirror on the far wall. The clinic was quiet, just the soft hum of equipment and the sound of my own breathing. I reached behind my head and untied the mask. I unwound the scarf. I set them on the counter. I looked at my own face in that mirror, and I did not cry. I had expected to cry. I had rehearsed it on the taxi ride over, the moment I would finally see myself without covering, without disguise, without the costume I had worn for 5 years. I thought the tears would come the way they come in movies, sudden and cathartic and beautiful. They did not come. Instead, I just stood there breathing, looking at the woman in the glass, realizing that she had been waiting for me to stop hiding her. She was not new. She was not different. She was the face that had been there the whole time. Smooth skin, sharp eyes, 50 years of living written in the lines around her mouth. Hidden behind something my family thought was shame. It was never shame. It was patience. I pressed my bare fingertips against my cheek. Smooth. Warm. Mine. No gauze between my skin and my hand. No fabric. No barrier. Just me touching my own face in a clinic mirror, feeling the warmth of a body that had carried me through fire and 20 years of silence and a church basement and a kitchen floor. I put the mask and scarf in my bag. I would not need them again. 4 days. I had 4 days to prepare for a night I had imagined for 5 years. But before I chose what to wear, there was one more thing I needed to confirm. I picked up my phone and called Ivy. Go back to the apartment, I said. Check the painting in Chloe's living room, bottom right corner. Look for a pencil mark. She called me back 20 minutes later. Her voice was shaking, not from fear, but from something closer to disbelief. She said. I closed my eyes and smiled. Tomorrow came. And I walked into it the way I had walked out of that Pilsen hallway, straight-shouldered, unhurried, carrying everything I needed in one hand. The doorman at the Langham did not ask for my invitation. He looked at my face, then at the guest list, and stepped aside without a word. The lobby was marble and warm light. A sign on a brass stand read, Prescott Class of 1989, 35th, Reunion Grand Ballroom, 2nd floor. I followed the corridor to the double doors. I had imagined this walk 1,000 times. Down the corridor, through the double doors, into the light. In every version I trembled. In every rehearsal my hands shook, and my breath caught, and I had to pause before entering. But my hands were perfectly still. The banquet hall was gold-lit and enormous. Crystal chandeliers hung from a coffered ceiling. Round tables draped in white linen filled the floor, each set with candles and white lilies that perfumed the room with something expensive and funereal. A string quartet played in the far corner. 60-odd guests stood in clusters holding cocktail glasses, their conversations layering into a low, steady hum. I stepped through the doors. Ivy walked 2 steps behind me, carrying a second leather portfolio. She wore a black blazer and low heels. She looked like a junior attorney accompanying a client to a deposition. That is exactly what she was. I scanned the room without moving my head. Victor Wainwright stood near the bar, a glass of water in his hand, positioned where he could see both the entrance and the stage. Dr. Gallagher sat at a corner table, table 9, with a clear sightline to the doors. Both looked at me. Both nodded once. I did not nod back. I looked straight ahead. "Victor is at the bar," Ivy whispered behind me. "Dr. Gallagher is at table 9. FBI confirmed outside 2 agents positioned by 7:15. I said nothing. I walked forward into the room. Walking into that room was not an entrance. It was a detonation with a 5-second fuse, and I was the only person in the building who knew the timer had already started. I did not look for Gordon first. I let the room see me before he did. That was deliberate. I wanted the whispers to reach him before my eyes did. I wanted him to hear my name from someone else's mouth and feel the floor shift before he turned around. It took less than 90 seconds. A woman near the entrance, someone I did not recognize, someone from Gordon's graduating class, looked at me, looked at the guest list in her hand, and whispered to her husband. He turned. Then the couple at the nearest table turned. Then 2 women standing by the dessert display. The whisper moved through the room the way ripples move through water when you drop a stone, expanding outward in concentric circles, each one wider, each one louder. I stood in the center of the room with the leather portfolio in my left hand and my mother's pearls cool against my collarbone. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. I made no sound. I wore no perfume, deliberate. The only scent on me was clean linen and consignment shop fabric. I wanted nothing to announce me except my face. The whisper reached the far end of the room. Gordon was standing near the stage with Lydia. He held a whiskey glass in his right hand. He was laughing at something she had said, the loose, performative laugh of a man who wants the room to see him having a good time. Lydia stood beside him in a green dress, her hand on his arm, playing the role she had been cast in The Beautiful New Woman, the upgrade, the proof that Gordon Prescott had moved on to better things. Someone said my name. Not to me. To Gordon. I saw the person lean in and speak. I saw Gordon's laugh stop. I saw his head turn. You know that moment when someone sees a ghost? That is what I watched happen on Gordon's face, except I was not a ghost. I was the woman he had spent 5 years telling everyone was too broken to show up anywhere. His face cycled through 3 phases. The first was non-recognition, a blank look the way you look at a stranger who seems vaguely familiar. The second was recognition, his eyes narrowing, his mouth opening slightly, the realization arriving like a train you can see but cannot stop. The third was disbelief, pure, unprocessed disbelief. Because the woman standing across the room in a navy dress with clear skin and steady eyes was supposed to be scarred, masked, invisible, and gone. He did not drop the glass. He did something worse. He held it tighter, his knuckles whitening around the crystal, as if the glass was the only thing keeping him upright. I watched his face do in 5 seconds what it took me 5 years to plan. Lydia noticed. She followed Gordon's gaze across the room and found me. She did not recognize me, she had never met me. She looked at Gordon's expression and squeezed his arm. "Who is that?" she asked. Gordon did not answer. His mouth formed a word, my name, but no sound came out. He stood there with whiskey tilting in his glass and the color leaving his face while 60 people watched the man who had called his wife monstrous stare at a woman with perfect skin and a leather portfolio full of everything he had tried to steal. I said nothing. I did not need to. The silence was doing all the work. Gordon set his glass down on the nearest table, carefully, deliberately, the way a man handles something when his hands have just started shaking. Lydia grabbed his arm and said something I could not hear, but I did not need to hear it. Because across the room, Ivy had already opened her portfolio, and Victor Wainwright was walking toward the microphone stand. Victor tapped the microphone once. The feedback whined through the banquet hall, and the string quartet stopped mid-bar. 60 guests turned toward a man they had never met standing under the central chandelier, holding a single sheet of cream-colored letterhead. He did not introduce himself with small talk. He did not smile. He stood the way a man stands when he has been asked to deliver a verdict. "My name is Victor Wainwright," he said. "I am the Director of Decorative Arts at Christie's Chicago. I was asked to be here tonight to read a certified valuation into the public record." The room was already quiet. Now it became something else. The kind of silence that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing against your eardrums like altitude. Victor unfolded the letterhead. He held it at arm's length and read without rushing. "The collection restored under the name E.M. Restoration, held in trust by St. Brendan's Church Charity Fund, has been appraised by Christie's at a certified auction value of $8.7 million. He paused. The number hung in the air the way a chandelier hangs suspended, enormous, impossible to ignore. The sole restorer and artistic identity behind E.M. Restoration is Eleanor Prescott. Victor folded the letterhead, placed it on the microphone stand, and stepped back. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He had done what I asked him to do, and he had done it perfectly. I stood near the far wall with my hands at my sides and watched the room process what it had just heard. It moved through the crowd in stages: first disbelief, then whispered arithmetic, then the slow turning of heads. Person after person looked at me, at the woman in the navy dress standing alone by the wall, the sanitation worker, the one with the scars. Gordon was standing 12 feet from the microphone. His hand was frozen mid-reach for his whiskey glass. His mouth opened and the words came out broken. "That is not—" She was a sanitation worker. He said it to no one. He said it to the air. He said it the way a man speaks when the floor has just disappeared beneath him, and he is trying to explain to gravity why he should not fall. I watched him do the math. 5 years of cleaning office buildings before dawn. 5 years of restoring antiques after dark in a church basement. And every dollar held in a trust fund his divorce petition could not reach. $8.7 million earned one piece at a time by a woman whose husband threw bills at her face and told her to buy a bus ticket out of the city. The room was still processing when Ivy moved. She walked through the banquet hall the way she walked through a courtroom, measured, unhurried, the leather portfolio open in her hands. She stopped at Gordon's table and placed 3 sealed envelopes on the white linen. Each one had a name written on the front in black ink. "One for you," she said. "One for Caleb. One for Chloe. Read them whenever you are ready." Her voice was perfectly level. 22 years old, and her hands did not shake. I had never been prouder of another human being in my life. Gordon tore his envelope open. I watched his eyes move across the page, a 2-page legal summary confirming that every restored asset was held under the church charity fund, structured beyond the reach of marital asset division. The document his attorney had filed demanding half of my assets was now a piece of paper demanding half of nothing. He crumpled the edge of the page. His knuckles went white. He looked up at me across the room, and I held his gaze without blinking. Then the service corridor door opened. 2 men in dark suits walked into the banquet hall. They did not look at the guests. They did not look at the stage. They walked a straight line through the room with the kind of purpose that makes people step aside without being asked. They stopped in front of Lydia. The taller agent spoke first. His voice was calm, professional, and loud enough for the nearest 3 tables to hear. "Ms. Kowalski, we need you to come with us." Lydia's face drained of color. The green dress, the diamond earrings, the hand that had been resting on Gordon's arm all night, all of it froze. "My name is Montgomery," she said. Her voice broke on the second syllable. "No, ma'am," the agent said. "It is not. Do you know what it looks like when a man realizes he destroyed his marriage to chase a con artist, while his wife quietly built a fortune? He will never see a cent of—" "I can tell you exactly what it looks like. It looks like Gordon Prescott standing in a banquet hall holding a crumpled legal document in one hand and an empty whiskey glass in the other, watching two federal agents walk his future out the door. They did not handcuff her. They placed a hand on each arm and guided her toward the service corridor. Lydia did not resist. She did not look back at Gordon. She walked with her chin up, and her shoulders rigid, the posture of a woman who had rehearsed this exit in her mind 100 times and always known it was coming. The room smelled like lilies wilting in the heat of 60 bodies and the sharp edge of whiskey from Gordon's tilted glass. I had not taken a single drink all night. My mouth was dry and my pulse was steady, and I felt nothing except the weight of 5 years lifting off my chest 1 pound at a time. Gordon looked at me across the room. His mouth opened. I think he was going to say my name, or maybe he was going to say he was sorry, or that none of this was real. But I did not wait to find out. I put my hand on Ivy's arm and turned toward the front entrance. I have seen enough, I said. We walked out past the valet stand into the November air. The cold hit my face and it tasted like the end of something. No, it tasted like the beginning of something else entirely. The cab ride back to Pilsen took 22 minutes. I did not speak. Ivy did not speak. We sat in the back seat with the windows cracked and the November air cutting through the gap, and I let it sting my face because it was the only thing I could feel. Ivy kicked off her shoes at the apartment door and sat down on the kitchen floor. Not the chair, not the couch. The floor. She pulled her knees up and pressed her back against the cabinet and looked at me with the expression of someone who had just watched a building come down. He just stood there, Mom. I sat down across from her. The tile was cold through my dress. I wrapped my hands around a coffee mug that had been sitting on the counter since before we left, hours old, untouched, cold as stone. Tell me, I said. Ivy told me everything. She told me that after I walked out, Gordon did not move. He stood at his table holding the crumpled legal summary in one hand and the empty whiskey glass in the other, and he did not move for 5 full minutes. Not a step. Not a word. The room went on around him. People whispering. People gathering their coats. People pretending to check their phones so they did not have to look at the man whose wife had just been named an 8-figure restorer and whose mistress had just been walked out by federal agents. Not a single person went to him. Not one classmate in that room touched his arm or said his name. 35 years of alumni connections, and not one of them was real enough to survive what they had just witnessed. Caleb showed up at the end, Ivy said. He read his envelope standing up. Then he called Gordon 3 times. Gordon just stared at the table. I pictured it, my stepson standing over his father with a phone pressed to his ear, calling a man who was 6 feet away and refusing to answer. The distance between them was not physical. It was the kind of distance that opens when a family discovers it was never actually a family, just a collection of people standing in the same room pretending. And Chloe? I asked. Ivy shook her head. She never opened hers. She put the envelope in her purse and left through the kitchen exit. Did not say goodbye to anyone. I want to tell you I felt victorious. I want to say I smiled or cried or raised a glass. But the truth is, I sat across from my daughter on the kitchen floor at midnight and felt the strangest thing, nothing at all. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief yet. Just the hollow sound of a clock ticking in a quiet apartment, and the smell of cold coffee and leftover banquet perfume on Ivy's blazer. Gordon finally walked out alone. No mistress, no taxi, no one waiting. He walked into the valet lane where her car was already gone, and stood there until the doorman asked if he needed help. Ivy watched from the lobby. She said he shook his head once and started walking north on Michigan Avenue in his dress shoes with no coat. That was the last anyone saw of him that night. The following week, Garrett called. It was Tuesday late afternoon, and the light through the Pilsen windows was the color of weak tea. 4 victims, Garrett said. 3 states before Illinois: Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. Gordon is the 4th, and he is the first case where the spouse built the evidence file before the bureau even opened theirs. I held the phone against my ear and stared at the navy dress hanging on the back of the bathroom door. The dress I had sealed in a garment bag for 5 years. The dress I had worn exactly once. What happens to her now? I asked. Garrett laid it out. She was cooperating partially. The shell company had collected promissory notes from Gordon totaling $340,000 on top of what he had already borrowed against his pension. His financial exposure was total. He would be compelled to testify as a federal witness and, when it was over, he would have nothing left except the debt and the testimony. Revenge is not a meal you eat. It is a surgery you survive. And when the stitches come out, you do not celebrate. You just breathe differently. And Caleb, I said. Done, Garrett said. Badge stripped. Blacklisted from private security in Illinois. The licensing board in Indiana confirmed Tuesday his credentials were never real. The whole file was fabricated. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Caleb was 35. He could start over. He could go back to Indiana and find honest work and build something that did not depend on fake paperwork and a father's crumbling connections. Whether he would choose to do that was not my problem. I drank the cold coffee at 2 in the morning. It was bitter and hours old, and I drank it anyway because it was the only thing in the apartment, and I was not going to open a bottle of wine to celebrate the destruction of a man I had once loved. The metallic taste of adrenaline was finally leaving my body, replaced by something quieter and harder to name. Ivy came out of the bedroom in a sweatshirt and sat beside me on the couch. Are you happy? She asked. I looked at the navy dress on the bathroom door. I looked at my hands, steady, still the hands of a woman who restores broken things for a living. I told her the truth. I am not happy, I said. I just feel relieved. She nodded. She understood. Then she said the thing that turned the relief into something else entirely. Gordon called. Twice. While you were in the shower. He did not leave a message either time. The third call came on Tuesday morning at 6:14 a.m. The phone screen lit up the dark apartment and I saw his name, and I answered because a man who calls 3 times without leaving a message is not angry. He is afraid. I sat up in bed and pressed the phone to my ear. I had already made coffee. I had been awake since 5, watching the ceiling, waiting for something I could not name. Now I knew what I had been waiting for. What did you do to me? Gordon said. His voice was trembling. Not the performative trembling of a man who wants sympathy. The real kind. The kind that comes from the bottom of the chest when the ground has been pulled out and there is nothing left to stand on. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot. Freshly made. Not the cold dregs of reunion night. I did not do anything to you, I said. I just stopped shielding you. Silence, then breathing. Then the question I knew was coming. Why did you come to the reunion? Why did you— It was my class reunion too, I said. I had every right to be there. More silence. I could hear him swallowing. I could hear the hum of whatever room he was sitting in. Not the Bridgeport apartment, somewhere else, somewhere temporary. A motel maybe? A friend's couch. The kind of place a man ends up when his mistress has been escorted out by federal agents and his wife's fortune turns out to be untouchable. The money, he said. Is it really 8? It was never in my name, I said. It was never in yours. And it was never the point. Have you ever had a conversation where every word you say is calm and every word the other person says is breaking, and you realize the calm is not performance? It is just what is left when you stop carrying someone else's weight. I had carried Gordon's weight for 22 years. His debts, his lies, his gambling, his rage, his children from a previous marriage who installed cameras in my home and forged credentials to follow me. I had carried all of it. And now I was sitting in a Pilsen studio apartment drinking hot coffee at 6 in the morning, and I was not carrying any of it. He was silent for 11 seconds. I counted. Then I hung up because I had said everything I needed to say 20 years ago. He just was not listening then either. I set the phone on the nightstand and looked out the window at the early light coming through the glass. The sky over Pilsen was the color of graphite and pearl. I finished my coffee. I did not cry. I did not smile. I just sat there and breathed differently than I had breathed in 5 years. That weekend, Ivy and I drove to Bridgeport. The third-floor apartment was half empty. Furniture gaps marked the places where things had been removed. A bookshelf, the hallway table, the coat rack by the door. Dust sat on surfaces Gordon had not cleaned. The windows were closed and the air was stale and close. The lavender I used to keep in the kitchen was gone. The whole place smelled like absence. I did not look at the bedroom. I did not open the closets. I walked straight to the living room wall, Chloe's wall, where she had hung something that was not hers, and I lifted down the painting. 22 years in that apartment. And the only thing I wanted to take was a painting I had made with a kitchen knife in 2019 and given away because I thought it was not good enough. It was an abstract cityscape, the Chicago River at dusk. Blue-gray tones layered with palette knife strokes that caught the light differently depending on the angle. I turned it over and ran my thumb across the pencil mark on the back of the canvas. 2 letters. E.M. My initials before Gordon. My initials after him. I wrapped it in a cloth bag and held it against my chest. It was lighter than I expected. 5 years of wanting it back, and it weighed almost nothing. Do you want anything else from here? Ivy asked. She was standing in the hallway with her keys in her hand, looking at me with the steady patience of a daughter who has learned when to speak and when to wait. No, I said. Just the painting. I picked up 1 box of personal items papers, a few photographs, my mother's recipe cards, and walked to the front door. The metal doorknob was cold under my hand. I held it for 1 second. 1 second for 22 years. Then I let go. Mom, Ivy said behind me. The door. Leave it open, I said. It is not ours anymore. I carried the painting down 3 flights of stairs. The stairwell was quiet. My footsteps echoed the way they had echoed the night I left for the last time, except that night I had been running, and now I was walking. I set the painting on the back seat of Ivy's car and she started the engine. I looked up at the 3rd-floor window one last time. The curtain moved, just slightly, just enough. Gordon was standing behind it. He had come back. He was watching me leave through the same window I used to watch the street from when I was waiting for him to come home. And this time, he was the one who did not come to the door. Ivy put the car in drive. I did not wave. I did not look back again. I sat with the cloth bag on my lap and my hands on the painting and my eyes on the road ahead, because there was nothing behind me that I needed anymore. The first morning I woke up without an alarm, without a plan, and without fear was a Tuesday in December. I lay in bed for 11 minutes doing nothing. Not counting seconds. Not listening for footsteps. Not rehearsing an exit. Just lying there in clean sheets with lake light moving across the ceiling and the sound of wind pressing against floor-to-ceiling windows. I almost did not know what to do with it. The new apartment was in South Loop, 9th floor. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook. I had signed the lease in late November with money from a savings account Gordon never knew existed. Not the fund, not the restored collection, just the quiet account I had built dollar by dollar from 5 years of office cleaning. The apartment smelled like fresh paint fading into home. I made coffee. Good coffee. Not the cold dregs of midnight or the bitter leftovers of a night spent waiting for phone calls. The first cup that tasted like morning instead of survival. The painting hung on the living room wall. It looked different here. The abstract cityscape, the Chicago River at dusk, blue-gray tones layered with palette knife strokes, caught the morning light from the lake windows and threw soft shadows across the plaster. The kitchen knife texture I had carved exhausted in 2019 now looked intentional, architectural, alive. I reached up and straightened the frame. My fingers found the ridges in the paint. The same ridges. the same hands. It did not look like something I had thrown away. It looked like something that had been waiting for the right room. Ivy was asleep on the couch. She had stayed the night, something she did often, now driving down from Loyola on weekends with her textbooks and her laptop, and the quiet companionship of a daughter who had decided her mother was worth showing up for. She woke up when she smelled the coffee. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, padding into the kitchen barefoot. "The best sleep in years," I said. "No dreams, just quiet." She poured herself a cup and stood beside me at the window. The lake was gray and enormous, and it moved the way time moves when you are no longer running from it. "You know Chloe is going to find out her painting is gone," Ivy said. "It was never hers," I said. "She just hung it up first. If you are listening to this, and you are hiding your talent, hiding your face, hiding your worth under a name no one can trace, I am not going to tell you to stop. I am going to tell you to decide when, because the hiding kept me alive, and the stopping nearly killed me, but the choosing of the exact moment to walk into the light, that is the part that made it mine." January came. The new workshop opened in West Loop, a real space with real signage that read, "EM Restoration," in black letters above the door. Not a church basement, not a borrowed room. A proper address with a workbench and north-facing windows and the smell of linseed oil and varnish that had replaced bleach and cleaning fluid as the scent I carried home on my clothes. Victor walked in on a Thursday afternoon holding a freshly printed magazine. He set it on the workbench with a soft thud and stepped back, the way a man steps back when he is presenting evidence. I looked down. My own face looked back. The cover photograph was from the Christie's authentication session, me standing beside the restored Louis XV-themed cabinet, holding a gilding brush, unmasked, unscarred, looking directly into the camera. The headline across the top read, "The $8.7 million Secret." "Page 14, Victor said. "Full feature. They used the authentication photograph." I picked it up. The paper was glossy under my fingertips. The woman on the cover was wearing a work apron and no jewelry, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked like exactly what she was, a woman holding a paintbrush. "I look like a woman holding a paintbrush," I said. "You look like a woman who built a collection worth more than most galleries in this city," Victor said. Ivy took the magazine from my hands and held it at arm's length. She studied the cover the way she studied case law, carefully, thoroughly looking for the thing everyone else would miss. Then she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that fills a room. "Chloe will lose her mind when she sees this," she said. "Chloe already lost her mind," I said. "She just has not noticed yet. Revenge is not the fire. Revenge is what you build after the fire with the same hands they said could not hold anything worth keeping. Every cabinet I stripped and regilded, every inlay I matched grain by grain, every finish I mixed by lamplight in a church basement while the rest of the city slept, that was not revenge. That was just work. The revenge was standing here in my own workshop, with my name on the door, and my daughter laughing beside me, and a magazine cover that said what I had been too afraid to say for 5 years. I took the magazine home that evening. I set it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee mug. The cover caught the same morning light as the painting on the wall, both made by the same hands, both finely in the right place. I stood at the window and looked at the lake one more time. The water was black and silver in the January dusk. The city hummed behind me. The apartment was warm. The painting was mine. The name was mine. The life was mine. I said it to no one, to everyone. To the woman who had been lying on that Bridgeport floor 5 years ago with $20 bills scattered around her head, and a man standing over her telling her she was not worth the paper. Now people know my name. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 5 years hiding behind a mask, not because I was broken, but because I was building. And if I am honest with you, my biggest mistake was not the hiding. It was all the years before that when I believed that staying quiet and staying loyal would be enough to keep my family together. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait until they push you to the floor to realize your silence was never protecting you, it was protecting them. The lesson I carried out of that apartment, out of that marriage, out of that life, is simple. Your value does not depend on whether the people around you can see it. I cleaned offices at night and restored art in a church basement, and not one person in my family thought I was building anything worth knowing about. But I was. And when the truth came out, it spoke louder than anything they ever said to my face. I believe God put me through those years for a reason, not to punish me, but to teach me that the strongest thing a woman can do is outlast the people who underestimate her. Among all the family revenge stories I have heard, mine taught me that real revenge is not destruction. It is becoming someone they can no longer deny. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own life or someone you love, I would appreciate it if you left a comment and told me what part stayed with you the most. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it today. And if you want more family revenge stories told from the heart, subscribe to Family Revenge so you never miss one. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were adjusted for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. But the message, the lesson about knowing your own worth, that part is as real as it gets.
And that's all for today. I appreciate you watching. See you next time.